I wasn't going to do a video on this, but Eddie Hearns has been parroting on about the Wladimir Klitschko versus Anthony Joshua fight for a few days now. I've just finished watching Eddie Hearns give an interview on Sky Sports. I didn't watch it live, it was on YouTube. Eddie Hearns said, a lot of things you've already heard probably for the last few days now, that they contacted Klitschko's manager, and Klitschko's manager's up for the fight, Vladimir's up for the fight, Joshua's all smiles about this fight happening. But then he also goes on to say that it depends if this fight happens on if the numbers are right or not. If the WBA belt's going to be up for this fight. If Wladimir Klitschko isn't fighting Anthony Joshua, even, he said that Wladimir Klitschko would be fighting somebody for the WBA belt. This isn't very reassuring stuff when you're trying to get people's hopes up this way for a massive, super fight between Wladimir Klitschko and Anthony Joshua. So a lot of people have doubts about if this fight's going to happen, and Eddie Hearns has already given himself a big get out if this fight doesn't happen already by coming up with these excuses beforehand. Now, the first thing I'd like to say is, if Anthony Joshua does take this fight, you've got to give him a huge amount of respect for taking it. The reason I say you've got to give Anthony Joshua a huge amount of respect is because if you look at his last three opponents, Charles Martin, Dominic Brazil, Dillian Whyte, if I just go through them as quickly as I possibly can and explain this as quickly as I possibly can, I'll go from worst to best. Charles Martin. I showed the video of Charles Martin fighting when I did the prediction video for the Anthony Joshua fight, and he throws just kind of pathetic, amateurish arm punches during that. It was the Raphael Love fight I was showing, and he wasn't putting his body behind any of these punches at all. It was really lackadaisical, lacking any skill arm punches, and he just didn't have the skill level to be fighting at that top level. When Charles Martin's more experienced and he's been fighting for a while, I seriously doubt he's going to be in the top 20 at all. So that's the worst one. Dominic Brazil as well. If you just watch the Fred Cassie fight, and there's also another fight for Dominic Brazil, I think it was the one previous to Fred Cassie. And I'll just go through the Fred Cassie one quickly. Fred Cassie was beating Dominic Brazil in every single round, and even had Dominic Brazil down and thinking one of the early rounds. The reason Dominic won that fight was because in the last or second to last round, Fred Cassie had bit half his tongue off. And that's the reason why Fred Cassie couldn't continue, and that's the reason Dominic Brazil got the win for that fight. There was also another fight Dominic Brazil took, and it looked quite clear that he'd lost the fight, but he got the win for that as well. Dillian Whyte's best opponent is Anthony Joshua's best opponent is Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte's my second favourite fighter. It doesn't mean I think he's the second best fighter in the world right now, of course. He's a rising prospect still. He's only ranked 33 in the world. But Dillian Whyte shows some promising things. He's got a solid chin, he's aggressive, he's got a bit of a punch behind him as well. But he's not the most skilled boxer in the world. He makes some amateurish mistakes in the ring. His footwork's not the best. And even though he does have a big punch, that's one of his virtues in the ring. When you compare that to what Wladimir Klitschko was at that stage of his career, Wladimir Klitschko had almost a 90% KO rate. Dillian Whyte doesn't even have an 80% KO rate. Doesn't mean Dillian Whyte doesn't have a punch, but what it does mean is, if you're talking about Dillian Whyte being good because of his punching power, it's not at that same level as Wladimir Klitschko is. Now, the sensible thing for Anthony Joshua, to do next after these fights is to fight someone at a world level. The names like even Hughie Fury. I know he's not world level yet, but he's showing a lot of promise. He is well known in the boxing community. He comes from the same family Tyson Fury has. He's got good footwork. He's not a KO artist, but he does display a lot of skill in the ring. that's the kind of opponent that was going to be announced for Anthony Joshua fighting next. Stavern as well. He was the guy that got into the top 10, but couldn't quite make it to be, the number one spot, to be the champion. And, that would be the kind of B level opponent, you'd expect Anthony Joshua to be fighting next. Also, Kubrat Pulev was the guy that was mentioned for Anthony Joshua, someone that had fought in the top level, beat some top 10 guys, but didn't quite make it to the very top. That was a next step for Anthony Joshua. So to miss out these level of opponents and just to skip from the Charles Martins and Dominic Brazils right up to Wladimir Klitschko is a huge step. So if Anthony Joshua does take this, and just like I said, we're going to know within 4 days, the end of this week, that's what Eddie Hearn says, then you've got to give Anthony Joshua a huge amount of respect for being pushed into this fight as early as he is. Now, whereas Wladimir Klitschko doesn't really deserve any respect for taking on Anthony Joshua, Wladimir Klitschko's been fighting and beating the number one contenders in the division for 11 years now. What Wladimir Klitschko does deserve, if he actually does go and fight Anthony Joshua and he does beat Anthony Joshua, he does deserve respect for that, because Wladimir Klitschko, though he has been at the top level and beating guys that people thought could beat Wladimir Klitschko. Samuel Peter was supposed to knock out Wladimir Klitschko. A lot of people thought David Haye was going to beat Wladimir Klitschko. A lot of people thought Alexander Povetkin, and surprisingly now some people would be thinking, a lot of people were thinking Kubrat Pulev would beat Wladimir Klitschko, and Wladimir never got any respect for any of them wins to the majority of people. So people need to remember the amount of hype that's been around Anthony Joshua right now. I was reading before Anthony Joshua was even in the top 10, people saying that they thought Anthony Joshua would beat Muhammad Ali. Now, a lot of people might say, yeah, well, Muhammad Ali was a big heavyweight in the 70s and he wouldn't compare now or whatever. But just to say that, I've never heard someone say that about a rising prospect. Maybe they said that about Mike Tyson, and I don't know, I'm not that old. But I've never heard anyone say that about a rising prospect before, that they would think he would beat Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is supposed to be the gold standard of the heavyweight division. So there's a massive hype around Anthony Joshua right now. People have huge hopes for Anthony Joshua. A lot of people think Anthony Joshua already is the best heavyweight of all time. Some people do. A lot of people probably don't, but some people do. So if Wladimir Klitschko does beat Anthony Joshua, he deserves a massive amount of respect for beating him. It's not the same as beating Tyson Fury, but he deserves respect for beating Anthony Joshua. So that's my first thoughts. That's what I think of this fight so far. I'm very sceptical this fight's going to be made, but just like I said, Eddie Hearns said in 4 days we should know if this fight's going to be made or not, so crossing my fingers.